Welcome to the Attempting Stand-Up Comedy Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Cambridge. Welcome to the book review edition. This is the first installment in the book review where I take a book I'm reading and I do a short review. It's going to be the top 5 takeaways and the one aha. And today's book, the first installment on the Attempting Stand-Up Comedy Podcast, is Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. So thanks for tuning in. This adventure is extremely exciting for me personally. I hope it is for you as well, kind of getting a behind-the-scenes experience to the Attempting Stand-Up adventure. But also, if you love comedy, what a great way to kind of peel the curtain and look behind it, like open it up and go, so what's it like to make the sausage? What's it like to write the jokes? What's it like to take the stage and prepare and do the comedy attempt? And it's an adventure that I'm on. Obviously, this is very much an early stage experience for me. And there are some fabulous, smart comics and people with great experience that I get to interview during the podcast. So stay tuned to the full feature episodes. But this is the book review episode where I talk about a book that I'm reading, studying. So I have done the audiobook version of Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. And it was great because he was in my mind and in my head, like, flying down the highway, listening to him talk about this. Now, it's really a memoir. It's about his life, and he goes back in time and takes us on this story of how he began his career as an entertainer. So I want to share with you these 5 takeaways in this one aha. But before I do, I need to emphasize this, that when you read a book or you're going through some kind of study or learning, a lot of times you can hear somebody's interpretation of it. You got to understand it's from that person's perspective. So this is from my perspective. This won't be the right or correct way to interpret this book. It's just my perspective. Okay. So I want to say that on the onset that this is not an expert review. It's just my personal review. And I love the authenticity of this book. Steve Martin does not try to paint a rosy picture of what it was like to get started. And that's exactly where I am today, is on that early stage of attempting stand-up. So let's dive in. This is takeaway number 5. Takeaway number 5 in the book, Steve Martin says, I saw empty seats. I had reached the top of the roller coaster. What happened was he stepped into an auditorium to do a live show, and normally his shows were sold out. And when he saw empty seats, he started seeing that there was a decline in this massive draw to what he was doing. And why I really appreciate that, and that's one of my big takeaways, is because we have to understand that, there's a season for everything. And some people want to be successful, or they want to be well known, or they want their craft to be heard and listened to by, thousands or millions. And the reality is, sometimes it ends. And I've been around some comics that have had some great rides and are at the, call it closing down stage, like phasing out maybe. And Steve Martin saw that even in his own act, even his wonderful, groundbreaking, pioneering his style was, he saw how that did decline at a certain point. Obviously, he transitioned into acting and making movies and the such. And what I love about Steve Martin is he doesn't really need an introduction. But ultimately, that was a big takeaway for me. Be fully aware that you can have a fabulous career and an experience, but at some point, there will be empty seats. Number 4 takeaway, I did it for you. I did it because of you. And this is very much any artist creating craft, right? And so, why do you go in the kitchen and cook the cake, bake the cake? You do it because you want to share it with somebody. Okay, so I did it for you. I did it because of you. So this crowd, this audience, the people that come to his shows, all that work, and it was literally like a 10-year adventure for him creating this amazing show. It literally is for the people that he's bringing that talent, that craft to. And that's important. Like, so here's my premise and my takeaway for that, for number 4, is if you're doing it for others because you want to share it with them, isn't that the gift? Because comedy is a shared experience. So it's not a soloist act, even though you are writing and creating personally and privately, and then, doing the open mics to test content. Ultimately, you want to share it with somebody. So I really love that. I did it for you. I did it because of you. That was my 4th Big takeaway. Number 3, I opened the show with this line, and I quote Steve Martin. I have decided to give the greatest performance of my life. Oh, wait, sorry. That's tomorrow night. And there's 2 ways to look at this, right? Obviously, that was a misdirection, and he surprised you with this tomorrow night deal, and that tonight's not going to be the great show. But what that takeaway did for me in listening to this audiobook and reading about the life of Steve Martin as a stand-up comedian and a performer, entertainer, was that there's always a tomorrow, right? So whatever you're doing and attempting, today's good, tomorrow could be better. And there's another audience, another group, another crowd, and they're different, that can experience all the craft that you're working very, very hard to create. And so I really respected that. Even though it was a funny, and it was kind of like, hey, y'all, this is going to be good, but not going to be as good as it could be. I really listened through that message that there is a tomorrow. And so, I'm going to give today 100% and know that tomorrow is another opportunity to keep getting better and improving. So that's kind of why I do these book reviews. I'm an endless learner, and I'm obsessed with the craft of learning comedy right now. So let's enjoy this adventure. And so in this first book review, Steve Martin, Born Standing Up, the number 2 takeaway. This is a quote from Steve Martin. Comedy is a distortion of what is happening. And there will always be something happening. And that takeaway kind of embedded in me this attitude that there's an endless reservoir of content. A lot of creators, a lot of artists can always get that, call it writer's block, or you kind of think, man, it's hopeless. Where am I going to create? What am I going to create? And is it any good? And the reality is there's always something going on. And so you just take that experience and share it through your point of view. Take it and filter it through your lens of whatever comedy style you're up to and you're into. And even for you as somebody who may observe comedy and enjoy it and consume it, isn't that exciting to know that there's so much potential for additional content? It's never going to stop. Because as Steve Martin said in my number 2 takeaways, comedy is a distortion of what is happening, and there will always be something happening. Okay, well, here we go. Number 1 takeaway for me from the book, Steve Martin, Born Standing Up, A Comedian's Life, a Comic's Life, is, thankfully, persistence is a great substitute for talent. Let me read it again. Thankfully, persistence is a great substitute for talent. Steve Martin, in his book, he talks about how he was not funny when he started. He did not have any jokes. He was creating this act, and a lot of it was kind of the spontaneity, then redefined, and then mastered and memorized, and then kind of reorganized, and he creates this show that is now iconic. And ultimately, his life exemplifies somebody who started with an idea and was persistent enough to work through that idea to bring it to audiences, and he performed greatly. So those 5 takeaways today are my quick book review of Steve Martin, A Comic's Life, Born Standing Up. But I need to give you the aha. Okay, you ready for it? The aha for me. This is the big aha. The big aha is, and I'm going to read this because when I heard him say this, I listened to the audiobook instead of reading because I do a lot of driving, and so I just found that to be a wonderful way to hear his tone as he would audibly speak the book. And when he said this, it was one of those moments where it kind of brought a lot of clarity to when and where you do what you do. And so just hear this out. This is the big aha for me from the Steve Martin book, Born Standing Up. In a public situation, this is Steve Martin saying this, in a public situation, I was expected to be the figure I was on stage, which I stubbornly resisted. People were waiting for a show, but my show was only that, a show. It was precise and particular and not reproducible in a living room. In fact, to me, my act was serious. So thank you, Steve Martin, for sharing that truth, that you perform where you perform in a room that is designed and engineered for that craft and for that comedy to that audience. And that you don't need to be that act elsewhere. You can be you. And you can enjoy life, and you can continue to laugh, and you can continue to see that there's something else still happening. So I hope you pick up this book, take a listen to it if you listen to audiobooks, or read it, dive into it, and there'll be different takeaways for you. But those are my 5 takeaways and my big aha. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Attempting Stand-Up Comedy Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube at Tim Cambridge Comedy. That's Tim Cambridge Comedy. And also follow me on Instagram at Tim Cambridge, and subscribe to listen to the podcast wherever you enjoy downloading your favorite episode of whatever you're listening to. Remember, be an endless learner, have the courage to take the stage, and let's enjoy more laughter in our lives. And thanks for tuning in to the Attempting Stand-Up Comedy Podcast. I'm Tim Cambridge.